بين تحذيرات من حرب أهلية ودعوة لرفع العقوبات، هل هي مجازفة ضرورية لأنه سوريا بتستحق فرصة جديدة؟ الموقف الأميركي الجديد تجاه سوريا بيتأرجح بين الخوف من الانهيار والرغبة بإعادة بناء النفوذ. بهالتقرير رح يتقاطع رأي مساعد وزير الخارجية الأميركي السابق للشؤون العامة بي كراولي مع شهادة السفير الأميركي الأسبق لسوريا ثيودور قطوف. واحد منهم بيقرأ الخريطة من زاوية المخاطرة والثاني من بوابة الفرص، ولكن اثنيناتهم اتفقوا على سؤال واحد: هل اللي عم بيصير بسوريا اليوم إعادة إعمار أم إعادة ارتباك؟ وليش الاستقرار بسوريا ضرورة للمنطقة؟
First challenge is to get Syria's internal house in order, and then you can begin to see how they're going to develop relations going forward with their neighbors. It is an enormously complex country. It is an enormously important country in the heart of the Middle East. It is something that if Syria is stable, chances are the region is going to be more stable. And so the policy objective of bringing stability, to Syria, helping Syria reintegrate with the region and the world, and trying to continue to draw Syria away from Iran's sphere of influence and towards a more integrated, regional, future. That's an appropriate policy goal. And certainly the decision on sanctions is appropriate, that as Syria is evolving, U.S. policy has to evolve, in concert. Now, when a country like Syria breaks apart, there is a scramble for power. We've seen that, over the past year. One element of Syria and the Syrian population has, in fact, achieved power. Now the question is, what do they do with it? So, what happens to, Sunnis that are now have achieved power? What happens to the Alawites that have lost power? What happens to the Kurds who are trying to figure out what is their role in the current Syria and the future Syria? So the ability of a untested government like we're seeing in Syria, to balance all of these elements, enormously complex.
وشو سمع ترامب من قادة دول الخليج؟
They don't want to hear about human rights. They don't want to hear about who they've jailed. They don't want to hear about press freedoms. They're not necessarily opposed to women's rights, but they want to control the pace and the degree to which all of that goes. Trump makes his own decisions, and he is very keen on having good personal relations with people in the Gulf, such as Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman or, Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE, the Qatari leadership, etc. Also, he has an on and off love relationship with President of Turkey, Erdogan. And I think he was hearing from both the Gulf leaders and from Erdogan that if this region is not to be plunged again into chaos and beyond what it already experiences, then Syria needs a helping hand. And it's particularly significant that the Gulf states are urging Trump to do this. Remember, the Gulf states do not like Islamist fundamentalism of any sort. They don't like Islam in politics. They like Islam, but not Islamist politics.
هل الرهان على سوريا بيستحق المجازفة؟
Secretary Rubio is right that U.S. engagement could be pivotal in helping guide Syria, going forward. But engagement requires resources. As the Secretary said in his congressional testimony, the current U.S. embassy, to Syria resides in Turkey. At some point, if you're going to engage a country, you need to return, diplomats, to Syria on the ground, working hand in hand with the government and other constituencies to try to help, Syria advance. And so, you have the issue of engagement, you have the issue of resources, And the backdrop of this is that there's enormous pressure on the State Department budget, the State Department structure, given the changes that the Trump administration have already implemented and have indicated they want to implement. So
are you saying that these
we'll wait to see how this plays out?
In any way, are you trying to say that these changes implemented at the State Department financially or politically and diplomatically will be a risk since it's a new territory?
No, I don't think there'll be a risk, but obviously, as the secretary said in his congressional testimony, 6 months ago, no one was talking about lifting sanctions. No one was talking about investing in Syria. We're here, so we have to find the resources to be able to help. We have to find people who are able to help, within the modified structure of the State Department, the elimination of USAID. And so there's a lot of pieces to put in place, to make U.S. policy effective going forward.
In his testimony, Secretary Roubio revealed that the FBI hadn't completed vetting Syria's new transitional leadership before the sanctions announcement. In your opinion, was President Trump fully briefed, or is this a case of security and diplomacy getting ahead of each other?
The new government in Syria is a reality. They're there. They're operating. And so the question is, do they need help? Yes. Sometimes you do have to take risks. It's unclear. The Syrian government is saying the right things. They seem to be doing many of the right things. But are they going to be successful? Are they going to listen, to good advice, from the United States, for example? So this is not risk-free. Syria is full of risks.
But wasn't it also the case before? It was a leadership, regardless of how we have seen it as dictatorship or not a dictatorship. But there was series of atrocities done by the previous regime, the Assad regime. Also, there are some reactions and eyebrows raised because of this new leadership. Ahmad al-Shara, known previously as Jolani, also committed a lot of atrocities. He was part of a head of a terrorist organization. How is that taken into consideration, especially there was a bounty on his head?
Absolutely. Your history is well charted there. Look, I remember being on the National Security Council staff around 2000 when Hafez al-Assad died. Bashir came into power, and we had hope that he would be a reformer. And he played that role cleverly for a while, but obviously, when push came to shove, he obviously, was, cut from the same cloth as his father. When the Obama administration came into office in 2009, one of their more controversial decisions, was to restore diplomatic relations with Syria, reestablish an embassy in Damascus. And it appeared to be having, a desired effect until the Arab Spring, the Syrian civil war, and we evacuated the embassy as a result.
السفير الأميركي السابق لدى سوريا ثيودور قطوف كان عنده رأي خاص بما يتعلق بالرئيس السوري الجديد.
I said when Shara came to power, Ahmed Shara, I said on another U.S. network, that, we'll have to see if he can walk the walk, not just talk the talk. He's saying the right things. He is trying to respond to what the Gulf states are telling him and to what the U.S. and Turkey, of course, is his biggest patron of all, and he'll listen very carefully to them. And indeed, the Turkish intelligence chief was just in Damascus meeting with Shara and other senior officials. As I said, the proof is in the pudding. He's clearly a very intelligent man. He's also seems to be a man who can recognize where Syria's current interests lie, and those interests and the interest of his regime are in getting as much investment and foreign aid and normalization with the World Bank and the IMF as possible.
Even though we have seen sectarian violence, specifically against minorities in Syria, erupt since Shara, who is known previously as Jolani, since he took office. Is there enough legitimacy on the ground to justify international support for this new leadership in Syria?
For the time being, yes. I mean, what Roubio really said, at the heart of what Roubio said, is if we give aid to Syria, we can't be sure that it will succeed in getting us the kind of state we want. But we can be sure if we don't aid Syria, we will fail and the regime will fail. So it was a warning to the rest of the world that it's time to open business and investment and diplomatic relations with this regime and give it a chance. My guess is the country that least liked the message is just immediately to the south, Israel.
Is it part of sending now Thomas Barak as expected to be named a special envoy? What does this say about Turkey's role and America's direction in Syria, given Barak's close relationship to Turkey as well?
Yeah, well, Barak, much like Trump, is a real estate man. He cut his teeth in Saudi Arabia, I think, on financial deals as a young man. He's had his ups and downs, but again, Barak is a transactional guy, much like Trump. He's looking for, what can you give me if I help you with this? How will you help me with that? And the like. And that's the kind of language that Erdogan and the Gulf leaders like.
وين بتوقف واشنطن اليوم؟
Could this policy fail? Yes. Is it worth the effort? Given how important Syria is, given how important it is to continue to try to wean Syria out of the Iranian orbit and into something better, I think that's worth the risks.
What is the importance of Syria? I heard you throughout the interview so far saying that Syria is important. Is it important for the region, and where is that importance lie, you think?
Well, in the Middle East, you always start with geography, right? Syria borders Israel, and that border, carries risks, and obviously that's another dimension of this challenge. Israel has, put forces into Syrian territory, and it's unclear, for how long and for what purpose. Syria borders Lebanon. And a time in the recent past where Syrian efforts destabilized, Lebanon. Hezbollah could not exist as an entity in Lebanon without support from Syria and through Syria, from Iran. So if we can help get Syria right, that's a big win. I always see a very significant connection between political stability and economic development.
Is this new approach toward Syria a diplomatic gamble?
Of course it's a diplomatic gamble. It was very controversial in 2009 when the Obama administration named an ambassador to Syria and put a functioning embassy back on the ground in Damascus. Tremendous risk. Ambassador Ford, felt that we were making a difference on the ground, but obviously, that was swept away by the civil war in Syria. So I do think that ultimately, the only way to make a difference is not by crafting policies from the outside. The only way to make a difference is try to figure out what Syria is trying to accomplish in this case and finding ways to be helpful. There's always going to be risk involved in this.
If this diplomatic gamble, as we agreed to call it, doesn't hold, what's the cost to U.S. strategic credibility in the Middle East, do you think?
If Syria fails, it will be ultimately because, Syria chose to move back into conflict. And oh, by the way, what's another country that has a keen interest in Syria? It's Russia. If we're not there, then Syria's future is shaped by other countries with conflicting interests. Whether you're talking about Russia, whether you're talking about Turkey. So I do think it's important for the United States to be engaged, but we've got to bring real resources and perspective to the table.
وهل إيران صارت خارج اللعبة بسوريا؟
Iran's expulsion from Syria, Hezbollah's diminution, Hamas's chastisement in effect at the hands of the Israel Defense Forces has opened new opportunities. And I think they're willing to give the new Syrian leader, Ahmed Shara, a chance, despite the fact that his roots originally were in Al-Qaeda. I believe Trump was going along with what they were asking, and I believe Roubio, his remarks, I believe, were actually intended to urge others to help Syria, since the U.S. doesn't like foreign aid very much, to say the least. I think his warnings were more of a spur to get the EU, to get the Arab states and others to help rebuild Syria.
أما سياسة ترامب يبدو أنها مختلفة عن الديمقراطيين ومختلفة حتى عن الجمهوريين التقليديين.
Let's not forget that George W. Bush went into Iraq, went into Afghanistan, tried state building, that Obama and the Democrats then inherited the situation. And indeed, Biden followed on Trump trying to get out of Afghanistan, but it was a messy, messy pullout, as we all know, one that hurt Biden politically in this country. So it's not that difference between Republicans and Democrats, it's difference between Trump and his people and everybody in the political establishment. Roubio was part of that political establishment, let's remember. Graham, the senator from South Carolina, it said never saw a war he didn't like us to get involved in. But they're all changing their tune under Trump because he clearly commands the loyalties these days of, it's not even so much the Republicans as populist sentiment in America.
وين نتنياهو من كل هاللعبة؟
Nobody can believe Netanyahu, let's be honest. The one thing Republicans and Democrats seem to agree on, who've been in power, who've been in the administration, is Netanyahu will lie to your face and smile at you. So when he was in the Oval Office and Trump announced that we were going to enter into nuclear talks with Iran, you could tell he was totally surprised. He had no indication, no inkling. So right there was a strong message from Trump. We are the superpower. We will do as we want, and it is in our interest to do. We don't have to follow a line that you try to impose on us.
بين تحذير وزير الخارجية الأميركي ماركو روبيو ورهانات كراولي وحذر قطوف، يبدو أن الخريطة الجديدة لسوريا عم تبنى على أرض غير ممهدة. فمين عم يحفر هالأساسات؟ واشنطن، أنقرة، تحالفات أم الوقت؟